Okay, so in this video we're going to look at what's called absolute value functions, and we're going to try to graph them. And we're going to use specifically this formula. Y is equal to A times the absolute value of x minus h plus k. Okay? Now you remember that functions are simply inputs and outputs. Remember that? Where I put in an x through some kind of an equation, some kind of an algorithm, some kind of I call it a function machine, and you produce some kind of a y value. And therefore you have an x and a y coordinate that's produced from a function. Okay? And because of that, we use something called function notation. And function notation basically just replaces the y with this designation here, which is called f of x. Okay, and that's again how you read that, f of x, that the function of x. Let's put it through this particular, again, equation. Okay, and you will produce some kind of a y value. So f of x is the same thing as y. Okay? F of x is the same thing as y. Now, the reason I'm using this particular formula is because the a, the h, and the k all mean something. All right, so let's go through some definitions first. The a tells you which direction your absolute value will open. So it tells you which direction. Let me just write this out here. Which direction your graph will open. Now, what does that mean? How does a graph open? Well, absolute values look like this. They look like V shapes, all right? Or they can open downward, all right? This one is opening upward. This one's opening downward. If the A value is positive, okay, then it will open upward, all right? If your A value is negative, it opens downward. Okay, so this is important information for you to have. Now, the h and the k is just the vertex of your absolute value. So, for example, this point right here would be the vertex. This point right here would be the vertex. And whatever number the h and the k is actually tells you where that vertex is. Okay, so let me give you an example of how this might work. Let's say I have the equation f of x is equal to the absolute value of x minus 1 plus 1. Okay? And we want to graph this. Now, how do we do that? Well, we probably would first want our x, y table. So I'm going to call this the xy table, but instead of the y, I'm going to say the f of x, because remember, f of x is the same thing as the y, okay? Now let's start putting in inputs through here so that we can see what the output will be. So in our first input, let's put in 0. So we'll say f of 0, right, because you replace the x with 0, is equal to the absolute value of 0 minus 1 plus 1. Let's work this out. The absolute value, 0 minus 1 is negative 1, but the absolute value of negative 1 is positive 1. Plus 1 will give me 2. Okay? So this will end up being 2. So my first point on my graph will be 0, 2. That'll be the coordinate that I produce. So 0, 1, 2. All right, let's try another one. Let's put in 1. So I will say f of 1 is equal to 1 minus 1 plus 1. Let's work this out. 1 minus 1 is 0. The absolute value of 0 is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. Therefore, my f of x will be equal to 1. And then my coordinate is 1, 1. So over 1, up 1. There we go. Now let's start analyzing something. As I'm working through this, right, I noticed that is there a number in front of the absolute value? Well, I saw that there is the a, if it was positive, was going to go up. If it was negative, it was going to go down. There's no number there, right? So if there's no number there, I always just put in a 1. It's understood that a 1 exists. So that's telling me that my graph is going to be opening upwards. Well, so far it looks like just by doing this, it could either go this way or it could go this way. I know now that it's going to open upward. Okay, so I haven't quite reached the vertex yet, but I can actually identify the vertex from this opening statement. Okay. So according to this, my vertex is going to be the h and the k. Now the h is the 1, not the negative, but just the h, the number itself, right? And then the k is 1. So 1, 1 should be my vertex. And then I know that the slope, again, is going to be at 1. So it's going to go this direction. So this is my prediction for my graph. Let's see if it actually works that way. Let's try another number. So according to this, if x were 2, right, there's 1, there's 2, that means that my y value, or my f of x, should be 2 as well. Let's see if that's true. So our input's going to be 2. Let's go with f of 2. I'm going to put in 2 minus 1 plus 1. 2 minus 1 is 1, plus 1 is 2. Sure enough, 2 is going to be my coordinate, and there it goes. Let's just try a negative just to make sure. So let's try like -1. According to this, it should be -1. Looks like that'll be +3. So let's try that. My input is -1. I'm going to get the absolute value of -1 minus 1 plus 1. By the way, I should put the 2 there. So -1 minus 1 is -2. The absolute value of -2 is 2. Plus 1 gives me +3. So my coordinate's -1, +3. Sure enough, there's my graph. Okay, so again, let's just be really clear about this and go over it one more time. Function notation just replaces the y value. Okay, you read that as f of x. That's my input. Here's my input table, or my t table. You put a number through, replace the x, right? We do that. Solve the algorithm or the equation, get the output, and you've created a coordinate. I can identify what the vertex or the tip will be by just looking at it in this form. Okay? The h is just the number without the sign in front now, right? The other way I actually do this, in case you get a little bit confused, is I ask myself what number is going to make this whole thing equal to 0. All right, so if it's like 0, what number is this going to be without the minus sign in there, right? So if it's like +1, I know it's going to have to be -1, if that makes any sense. If not, just go ahead and put the inputs in there. You'll still get the right answer. Okay, I hope that was helpful to you.